go with me to Luke 24. I want to talk about a subject that all of us know, the Emmaus Road. And if I were to title this sermon, I would say, The Sufficiency of Christ and the Stagnancy of Disappointment. Now, there's a number of interesting points that can be made in this passage. I was listening to Joseph Garlington speak on this, and he said, they could not recognize him until he did something they'd seen him do before. Broke bread. They'd seen him do that. And he opened up a great sermon of how often we don't see God in our midst until he does something we've seen him do before. It was a beautiful sermon. Preached it better than I would ever attempt to. But that's not the route I want to go, although it's a principle to consider. Are you missing God in your midst because he's not doing it the way he used to do it? Put that away. What I want to talk about today is perspective. I want to talk to you today about the way we think and the way we operate. I want to read to you a little poem. It's from an old Indian proverb and story, and it was a poem written about it. It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall. The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear. The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, I see, quote he, the elephant is very like a snake. The fourth reached out his eager hand and felt about the knee. What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain, quote he. 'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree. The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, even the blindest man can tell. What this resembles most, deny the fact who can. The marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grow, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope. I see, quote he, the elephant is very like a rope. And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. We've heard this, many of you probably have heard the story about the blind men who come to the elephant. And they each come away discussing what the elephant looks like. And really the only difference in all of their stories is their point of contact and their perspective. And so we read the story of the road to Emmaus, and we find two men who are trapped within a perspective. Because in their mind, their hoped Redeemer and Messiah has just been crucified. And we read that, and we read it very westernized, in the fact that we think, well, we actually enjoy the cross. It's our boast. We boast in the cross. We wear crosses on our neck. We wear crosses in our ears. We wear crosses. Everywhere a cross. But in ancient Israel, and in a Roman society, a cross was a sign of shame and nothing else. There was no worse way to die. And we glorify the cross because it's there that we know our redemption was bought. But up until that point, if you're a Jewish person in Jerusalem, you would ask for any litany of ways to die but a cross. Because it was on the cross that thieves and murderers and rebels were killed. It was the cross that Rome would use to deal with uprising. So if you were a leader and a revoltist and you really thought you had power, the way they put you in their place was to put you on a cross. Great power there, isn't it? See, that was the idea of Rome. We will deal with any that come against by putting them in such a place of mockery that all will know they could not have been a leader. So now you have these two disciples who have followed Jesus. We know they're not of the 12, but they're probably of the 70. They know him well enough to know what was going on and to be a part of Jerusalem. Maybe they weren't even part of the 70. Maybe they had only been in Galilee when he showed up. Maybe they were at the Feast of Cana. But they knew something about him. They said he was a prophet, mighty indeed and strong in the word. They knew this. So maybe they saw him call Lazarus forth. Or maybe they saw him heal the man with the withered hand. Maybe they saw his faithfulness show up in this circumstance or the other. But in their mind, their perspective was, this may be our hopeful Redeemer. This may be the one that we've been looking for. This may be the change that we've been waiting on. This may be the deliverer that pulls us out of Rome's occupation. See, there was a mindset amongst the Jewish people that when the Messiah came, that he would overthrow Rome. They're oppressor. If you're an oppressed people, the one thing you want from your Messiah is to deal with your oppressor. That would be saving us from what? You're saving us from Rome. Because that's all Israel could see. Little did they realize the greatest oppressor had nothing to do with Rome, but had to do with the work of sin that had taken part of their life. And the redemption was from the power of sin having power over them so that they could walk in freedom and walk in Christ-likeness and in righteousness. That's what he was coming to deal with. That's what the cross was paying for. But they're looking and saying, we need our Messiah to save us from Rome. So now you're walking on a road with your friend and you're talking about this. You and I are just walking down the road chatting. A couple of weeks ago, matter of fact, let's even go a week ago, we're watching him come to Jerusalem. And we're chanting Hosanna in the highest. Yes. We're preparing his entrance to the temple. We're fulfilling prophecy in our midst as the King of glory begins to come into Jerusalem. And we're preparing for what will one day be another return where he comes. And in their mind, they're not thinking of a second return. This is the coming of the Messiah. We see that and go, this pictures what will come. But to them, that was that. And you're walking down the road, chatting. I thought it was going to be him. you know any history of Israel, they had already had numerous people rise up to try to be the Messiah. The entire Maccabean revolt and the Maccabees that we find in first was this people that rose up and tried to restore faithful Israel. Matter of fact, uniquely enough, and the scholars debate this, although I don't think the city they're walking to is the same, the city of Emmaus was actually the place where Maccabees had one of their first great battles where they won. So what a unique thing that they're walking to the city that's name would remind them of victory. And they're walking and they're going, what happened? We hoped he was the Messiah. Did you hear the women? They're saying he's not even in the tomb. They're saying he rose, but he couldn't have rose. No one rises from the dead. That's unheard of. We saw him on a cross. We know he's dead. We know it's over. Every hope we had is gone. Everything we can see is changed. And when Jesus came and spoke to them, it said they stopped, stood still, and were sad. How many of you have been there? That's what I call the stagnancy of disappointment. You stand still and you're sad. You thought the job that you got was going to be the answer, and then it got pulled out from under you. You thought your marriage was going to make the turn and make it around that corner, and all of a sudden it broke down. You thought that the Lord was going to heal your loved one, and then you buried him. You thought that God was going to be there, and you couldn't find him. And so now you're singing a song of hope, but the reality is inside, you wonder where he's at and where he's been. You're looking around and saying, I thought this is what he promised me. I thought this is what he said. But this can't be that what I thought. That this doesn't look like what I thought. This doesn't look like what I was promised. This doesn't look like the word of the Lord that I got. This doesn't look like what the prophet told me was coming. He saw a palace. He never told me about the pit. He never told me about Potiphar. He never told me about prison. He just told me about a palace. Now I'm here. Where's my God? My God, why have you forsaken me? And what happens so often when our perspective is shook is that we begin to allow sadness to become the thing that marks our perspective. And it shakes us out of trust, and it puts us into a place where we cannot move. We're trapped under the weight of it. We're trapped under the disappointment. We're trapped under the struggle. We're trapped under the pressure. And all we keep looking at is what was said or what we thought. And we're there and we can't move. How many of you have been there? How many of you have drank that bitter water? And you come to church because you know you're supposed to come. But in the back of your heart, you begin to wonder, why am I wasting my time? I don't think he was faithful. He didn't do right by me. I thought he was going to do this, and it didn't happen that way. And what happens is now, what was once sadness becomes despair, and what was once despair becomes depression. That's right. And now, I can't even sing the song of the Lord anymore because I don't believe it. What used to be found in my home was the peace of God, and now the enemy has a playground set up to remind me again and again of the failure. Maybe some of you have been there, maybe not. Maybe some of you are too spiritual to admit it. Because I know what we do at church. We all put our suits and ties on and we forget Monday doesn't look this way. Maybe some of you are going to go to a job on Monday where you know your boss doesn't like you. And you don't know why the Lord hasn't put another opportunity. And the last prophet that you saw spoke that prosperity was coming. And you got to keep plugging away at a job where you don't think there's any change happening. I've been to enough churches to know that enough prophets go around saying a lot of nonsense and disappointing a lot of people. And it's amazing, they never call back to see if what they said came to pass. It's amazing how that works. Like B-52 bombers, they come in and drop a bomb off and then fly away. There's a rule amongst my prophetic sons. You call back. And if you missed it, you own it. Come back and apologize and say I missed. So that you can break them out of that cycle. But maybe you're there. Maybe that's become your address. Maybe you're the woman that's standing still and sad. And you're going, I thought that my life would look different now. When I was a little girl and my dreams were this and that, I didn't know this would be my portion down the line. And I talk about this Jesus, but what's he done for me lately? Where has he been? That's what these two men are dealing with. They're dealing with hundreds of years, really thousands if we go back to Deuteronomy and Moses saying, I'll raise up a prophet like unto Moses, that they've been waiting for their Messiah to come. And they thought, clearly it's him. Even more so because Jesus did a miracle that no one else did. He opened blind eyes. It was a unique thing because it was said about the Messiah that he would restore sight. But if you read all of the different miracles in the Old Testament, tell me how many you find where blind eyes get opened. It's a marker. So they have all these different markers. And if they know anything about him, they know he spoke to the waves and they stopped. He knows that they changed water to wine. They know this about him. But he's dead. He's not just dead. He didn't just have a heart attack. He was crucified by the very oppressors they thought he would overthrow. So you have your champion to fight against the oppressor, and the oppressor kills him. And now you're walking, and you're in so much despair you don't even realize Jesus is coming, starting to walk beside you. You're in so much discouragement that you can't realize Jesus is in your midst. And you're telling him about himself as though he's not fully aware that he was on that very cross. But you can't see your victor because you're too busy caught in the storm. Hallelujah. And he rebukes them. And it says he began with Moses and the prophets. Now, why is that important? Why do we say that? Moses and the prophets. Well, when we read the Bible, we think, we read in English or Westernized Bible, we don't read the Jewish Old Testament. So for the Jewish Old Testament, when you said Moses, you meant the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. And when you said the prophets, that actually included 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. It included the major prophets and the minor. It did not include Daniel. And so he's referencing a specific group of books. And it says, out of these, he spoke of who he was. And church, as much as I want to teach today, and as much as I want to bring depth, I want to talk about a little bit who he was. Because I've always wondered in my heart, what did he tell them about himself on that road? If there's one conversation in all of the Bible that I wish they would have written down, it's this conversation where he says he took the old covenant and opened up to them himself in every way through it. And their response was, our hearts burned. And so what I want to do today, what my hope is to find some of you who are really in that place of despondency, who have become stagnant in your despair and your disappointment. And I want to light your heart aflame again. Because right now, if you're stuck there, you're not moving anywhere for the kingdom. You're too busy not realizing the king is with you to begin to establish kingdom, that you're waiting for him to show up. You're walking into circumstances forgetting you carry him with you. And you're going, come help me out. And he's going, come let me out. But you won't do it because despair has distracted you. So let's look at what he might have said. In the Garden of Eden, Jesus was the seed that crushed the snake's head. On Mount Moriah with Abraham, Jesus was the son who would be sacrificed to become the provision of God. Alongside Joseph, Jesus was the man forsook by his brethren for pieces of silver. At the Passover, Jesus was the lamb whose blood could make death pass by. On the Exodus, Jesus was the rock who produced water in the wilderness. To the Levites, Jesus was the great high priest after the order of Melchizedek. To the Israelites, Jesus was the prophet who could come in a manner like Moses. To Joshua, Jesus was the commander of the army of the Lord. In the days of Judges, Jesus was the judge and deliverer. In 1 and 2 Samuel, Jesus was the prophet of the Lord. In 1 and 2 Kings, Jesus is the reigning king. In Isaiah, Jesus is the suffering servant. And Jeremiah calls him the Lord of righteousness. Ezekiel, he was the glorious temple. In Hosea, he's the faithful husband to an adulterous bride. In Joel, he's he who baptizes with the Holy Spirit. In Amos, Jesus is the possessor of the kingdom and the plumb line. In Jonah, we find that Jesus is the God of repentance and redemption for the Gentile. To Micah, Jesus becomes the teacher in Zion and the ruler of Israel. In Nahum, Jesus is the messenger of good news. In Habakkuk, Jesus is the glory of the Lord that will fill the earth. Zephaniah records that Jesus is the name of the Lord that all people will call on. In Haggai, Jesus is the latter glory. To Zechariah, Jesus is the pierced Messiah. In Malachi, Jesus is the refining fire and purifying oil. Jesus began to remind them who he was. In the midst of their despair, in the midst of their despondency, Jesus said, "This is who I am." And maybe right now you're in a season where you forgot who he is. Maybe you got distracted by the storm and you forget who Jesus is. See, if you're an orphan, he's the everlasting Father. If you're in need of protection, he's the mighty God. If you're carrying griefs, he'll bear your griefs. If sorrow is your burden, he'll carry that too. If you're without salvation, he says, "I am the gate of salvation." If you're in darkness, he says, "I am the light of the world." If you find yourself unfruitful, he says, "I am the vine." If you're confused, he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." If you need wisdom, he says, "I am the wonderful counselor." Who is he to you? Who has he become? Who have you forgotten that he was? What storm has distracted you from realizing Jesus is in your midst? If you're afraid of the government, you forget that it rests on his shoulders.
Yes.
If you're poor, you forget that he's your righteous judge. If you forget that, if your sin begins to overwhelm you, you forget he's your advocate. In Timothy it says he's the mediator between God and man. When Matthew talked about him, he was the king. And when Luke talked about him, he was the Son of Man. When Mark spoke about him, he was the servant of the Lord. When John spoke about him, he said he's the divine Logos, the Son of God. When Acts spoke about him, he was the risen king, the glorified one. When Romans spoke about him, he was he who fulfilled the work of the law.
Yes.
Who is he? Who have you forgotten that he is? What part of you has looked at the storm and magnified it to a mountain and forgot that he is the one who said you'll speak to the mountain and cast it into the sea? See, I'm not here to teach today. I'm here to remind you who Jesus is in your midst. Because you can get caught up in looking at all of the nonsense on television and looking at the divide of the races in this nation and looking at everything that's happening, and you can forget we serve a risen God who is King. You can begin to look and say, how will this work itself out? But when John was in Revelation, he looked for a man to open the scroll and pull off the seals, and he began disheartened because he said, there's no one that can open it. And the elder said to him, wait, look. was one. It was the appearance of a lamb slain before the foundations. And he looked and saw the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who was worthy to open up the seals. And John's sorrow in a moment when he didn't know how it would work itself out turned to joy when he realized Jesus was worthy to open it up. And so then we began to realize that this is now Alpha and Omega. This is beginning and end. This is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. This is the God of our salvation and the Lord of Lords. This is who Jesus is.
Oh, glory!
If you're sick, he's the great physician.
Yes!
If you're a widow, he's the kinsman redeemer.
Yes!
Thank you, Lord.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
This is who God is. What is it that you came in here with today
Thank you.
that you think is too big for our God?
Hallelujah.
What is it that you're carrying that you don't think he has an answer for? Because perhaps you've forgotten who Jesus is. See, I work as a chaplain among many men of different faiths. I work with immigrants. That's who I work with directly. And I know what the Muslims think about Allah. I've had them tell me. I know what my Indians think about Hindu beliefs, and Vishnu, and Krishna, and Shiva. I know what they think about Buddha. I've heard what they have to say. But see, one thing I find unique is I can find Buddha's grave, and I can tell you where Muhammad was buried. I can look and I can tell you that every Hindu god, they can't even actually make up a sense of who he was or where their origin began. But I can look at Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and I can tell you the town that he was born in. I can tell you his lineage and how he came down. I can tell you his bloodline and where he came from. I can tell you what he did in his life and where he was. There are witnesses that say that he came as Messiah. Then there were those that said he rose from the grave. And so when I go to find his grave, I cannot find him there. So what is it that you think your God cannot do? What are you going through that is greater than death? What storm are you in that you think he can't change? Who are you letting speak into your circumstance, into your situation? Because you had fishermen on a boat who saw a storm and they couldn't get their heads around it. But you had a Messiah who was sleeping. The question is, who are you watching? Are you watching those that are losing their minds? Or are you watching your God at rest in his kingdom?
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord.
It's time, church. It's time to wake up to the reality of who Jesus is. It's time to realize that it's not asking him to come, it's letting him out. Because that same Prince of Glory now by the Spirit dwells within us. And he's waiting for us to let him live in us and through us and to empower us to be his representation to a world who's looking for him. Stop asking him to part the clouds and come and begin letting him out. Begin looking at your storm and telling it, peace, be still. Begin speaking to your loved ones and saying there's a change that's going to happen. Begin calling out that husband who won't bend his knee to the Lord. And begin to pray and stop complaining. Begin to declare the word of the Lord. Do what my mother did when we were in rebellion. You'd come and lay your head on the pillow and find there was oil there. And you were surprised because you went, where did the oil come from? And then we learned, Mom went in our room when we weren't there and she called on the name of Jesus and said, my son and my daughter will serve the Lord. This is our faith. This is who we are. Stop getting caught in the storm. Stop listening to the naysayer. Stop watching the false report. And begin again to lift up the name of Jesus and to glorify the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and watch him move in your circumstance.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus.
Matthew Bridges wrote in the 19th century a hymn. And it goes like this. Crown him with many crowns, the Lamb upon his throne. Hark how the heavenly anthem drowns all music but its own. Awake, my soul, and sing of him who died for thee, and hail him as thy matchless King through all eternity. Crown him the Lord of love. Behold his hands inside, rich wounds yet visible above, in beauty glorified. No angel in the sky can fully bear that sight, but downward bends his burning eye at mystery so bright. Crown him the Lord of peace, whose power a scepter sways, from pole to pole that wars may cease, and all be prayer and praise. His reign shall know no end, and round his pierced feet fair flowers of paradise extend, their fragrance ever sweet. Crown him the Lord of years, the potentate of time, creator of the rolling spheres, ineffably sublime. All hail, Redeemer, hail, for thou hast died for me. Thy praise shall never, never fail throughout eternity.